take a look at some of these stories in a little bit more detail. Joining me to do that is Noah Khogali, Conservative councillor and political commentator. Noah, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very well. Shall we start with the Times lead story this morning and the problem that are facing universities where student fees are already, extremely high, £9,000 per year. Those fees, although really high, have been frozen for a while. They can charge far more for overseas students, and therein lies the problem. They are now reliant on money from overseas.
Yeah, so university fees have been frozen at £9,250 for the last 7 years. And apparently that is part of the reason for these pretty shocking rises in the difference between the number of foreign students and the number of British students, up to 57% now in terms of the fee received from overseas, up from 49% back in 2016. Apparently universities are losing about £2,500 per year on each UK student, which will apparently go up to £5,000 per student by the end of the decade. What this says, essentially in a nutshell, is that the funding model is unsustainable at the moment, and we probably need to be having quite a frank conversation about how we're going to fund our universities moving forward. It is a lot of money for a lot of people. I've long been something of an advocate for graduate tax, a change in the way that we pay for university, that we fund university.
Lay out what that would look like.
So essentially at the moment, that is kind of what we're doing, but somewhat by proxy. When you receive a loan to go to university, it's not really a loan. You can't default on it, and you only pay it once you're earning a certain amount. So we just need to be honest about the fact that this is essentially a tax that we stop paying at some point, and potentially just have us pay that for the whole of our working lives. And it might have to be something more significant in terms of the contribution, but that might make us have to look at whether university really is the sensible choice for lots of people, because it is becoming somewhat of a default and has become somewhat of a default for a lot of people leaving school. Yeah, and that's not necessarily always the right thing for them.
Yeah, I guess though for some, the cost of the student loan is it's astoundingly high for many people who then don't earn enough to properly be able to pay it off long term. And well, as you said, it's sort of like a tax that goes on for years and years. I mean, what about the cost of the fees? I mean, do they need to go up across the board?
Well, I think these figures say yes, probably, but whether you pay that in the form that we pay that now or through a graduate tax, where the numbers essentially look less scary, is a debate that needs to be had, really. We're obviously not washing our own face when we go to university. The numbers make that fairly clear. That's why universities are going after foreign students. And we need to be honest about that. These things aren't free, as much as we'd like them to be.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's many students sort of looking at their student loan thinking this is becoming, unsustainable. And those were fees at £9,000 a year, not anymore. There's lots of royal stories, of course, this morning, a weekend of, quite shocking news that we got last Friday. What we're learning quite a lot about, no, I don't know how much you're into the royal family, but the Princess of Wales and the King, the Times are talking about sort of, their relationship, how much closer they've got as a result of going through this, for both of them, sort of devastating cancer diagnosis at the same time. And actually, the Princess of Wales was inspired by the King to be more open and more transparent because of the reaction that the public gave to him.
Yeah, I mean, the whole story is overwhelmingly sad, really, both in terms of the cancer diagnosis and the online reaction before I think Kate came out and said what was really going on. I think anybody that had been online in any capacity had seen, a number of wild conspiracy theory jokes, things just outright untasteful. But it has been nice to see public figures be so open about something that affects so many people up and down the country, but is at the same time something, and it might be a British thing, that we really don't want to talk about, because it is hard. It's really hard on families. I mean, it can be a massive challenge, and it's important that we all know that it is something that affects everybody, every family up and down the country, and it's important we talk about it, both for our own mental health as well as making sure that people do go and get these regular checks that are so important.
I wonder what you make of the front page of the Telegraph that says China and Russia are behind the slurs on the princess. I mean, you've just been talking about we talked about it extensively actually last week as well, the sea of disinformation. But the paper says yesterday it emerged that there was growing concern in Whitehall that hostile state actors could be involved in whipping up the frenzied social media attacks on the princess. I mean, what do you make of that accusation?
It's no surprise, really, especially in a year where such a large proportion of the democratic world is going to an election. It's possibly the least surprising turn of events that China and Russia are trying to get involved and cause a bit of chaos. I think you only need to go on Twitter and look at the replies and see the faceless masses with many numbers in their usernames and tweets that only seem to be designed to cause confusion and disinformation, to see that something might be up. It is something that when we're online, we all need to be very aware of, and that we're not unwittingly perhaps
fueling it. Of course, even having a look at it and clicking on things and spreading all of that further. Seeing that it's Monday morning, this might not be on our agenda tonight, but maybe it has been over the weekend. Going to the pub at Noah, the Mirror have done this report. They say a third of landlords are forced to close early because of, number one, costs. But this is the second problem as well. Lack of custom, lack of demand to go. Do you recognise that?
I mean, it's been well reported that young people and students especially just are either choosing not to drink because of health reasons or just can't afford to. I think there was quite a few stories over the past couple of weeks, especially about people going to the pub not for an alcoholic drink. But of course, that might just mean people aren't going to the pub at all. And we've had loads of stories, especially since COVID, about nightclubs closing as well. And there is seemingly becoming a serious shift in the UK's drinking culture, possibly beneficial in terms of health, but damaging.
But what about in terms of community? That's the sort of difference, isn't it? Because you could still go to the pub, but go to the pub quiz, or I don't know what. I mean, for example, this week I'm putting on a community choir concert at a pub on a Tuesday night, which works well for the pub because it means it will be full on a Tuesday. But it can be that kind of meeting space without having to drink copious amounts of alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something I think lots of pubs potentially could do more of in terms of community activity. I know lots do already, but especially when local councils up and down the country, England, Scotland, are struggling, pubs stepping in as a place for community hubs could be a really good opportunity. And especially if people aren't automatically going to them to drink, that makes those kind of events a lot easier to pull off. There is opportunity here because they are often fantastic old buildings that are stunning and are also hubs of the community. And lots of pubs have the opportunity to work out how to use that for 2025, rather than just hoping that young people have enough money to drink.
Well, particularly those students. But I know, actually, being related to someone 10 years younger than me, my sister, her university experience has looked very differently to the one that I had. And definitely the drinking is, and I was not sort of a heavy drinker at university, but amongst her group of friends, they socialise in a very different way. The school gate, this is going to be a big debate today. Now, I know you were listening to what Terry had to say earlier. Is it right that we say, 150 metres from the school gate, it is inappropriate, actually, protest should be banned?
This is a very interesting story and a challenging one, I think, philosophically for a lot of people, because it really flies in the face of a principle that we should be teaching in our schools is really important, which is free speech. But then limiting that around the school gate feels to somewhat fly in the face of that. Nevertheless, some of the numbers in the report that has been referenced by the Times are staggering. So the polling commission by the review found that 76% of the public aren't honest about their views in public all of the time because as a result of fear and intimidation, especially when it comes to young people and students going to school and exploring what they think about the world and learning about the world. That could be just so incredibly damaging, and it's really, really important that we don't allow that to happen. So, as somewhat of a free speech advocate myself, I am uncomfortable with the idea of banning the location of protests, but this, if we're going to do any, this does seem like the place to do it.
Okay, right. So what you're saying is the consequence of the protest could be that the young people feel even more stifled to say what they want to say, which could be more damaging than the idea of banning the protest in the first place.
Yes.
Okay, but we'll have lots more on this. It's going to be really interesting because the government's cohesion advisor who's putting forward this review is going to be live on Times Radio Breakfast. Final thing I want to ask you about, Noah, what is the most ludicrous excuse you've ever used for getting out of anything? It might be not doing your homework or being late. Are you prepared to admit any?
I'm not really sure. I think I tend to blank them out of my mind afterwards. There's plausible deniability there.
I love this story. Jacqueline Wilson, the children's author, had a legitimate excuse that she missed a deadline because her friend's dog pressed delete on her laptop. I mean, can you imagine the horror that would go through you? First of all, when that's happened, but then also to realise no one is going to believe this.
Yeah, I'm going to use this because it feels so ridiculous to me. But then I thought about it. I can see it happening to, potentially not my parents.
Explain what happened.
So what happened essentially was the draft of her book, one of her dogs tip-tapped across the keyboard and essentially pressed delete all. The book disappeared. And her and her partner tried unsuccessfully to get it back for a long time until it seems they called a young person who came in and found it.
It's also a tale of grandchildren helping grandparents with technology, isn't it?
Well, that was my reaction. My initial, exclamation was, well, just have it online as well, obviously, because that would be my immediate reaction. So scared of knocking some water over and going over my laptop and me losing the book. Obviously, it's on some kind of cloud backup software, so I don't use it. But I think there's a lot of older people who are obviously more uncomfortable with that. They'd rather keep it on a USB stick or similar, which are famously unreliable. Just because you can hold it in your hand makes people feel like it's safe. It's really not. Please just put it online. Please put everything on the cloud.
There we go. The charge from Noah, put your work online, Jacqueline Wilson, or maybe have extremely helpful and available grandchildren around to help when you've accidentally deleted everything. Noah, thank you so much. Noah Khogali, Scottish Conservative councillor and political commentator.